So, what happens when a contract that seems as solid as concrete suddenly starts to crack under pressure? Well, we're about to dive into a massive construction project where one single, unspoken assumption brought the whole thing crashing down. This is the story of Codelfa's broken promise.
Look, let's put it this way. Imagine you hire someone to paint your house. You agree on a price, and it's a good price because they promise they're going to work all weekend to get it done fast. But then, bam, a new neighborhood rule pops up that bans any work on Sundays. All of a sudden, the job's going to take way longer and cost them a lot more in labor. Is that original deal you struck still fair? Well, that is the exact question we're looking at today, just on the scale of a multi-million-dollar railway project.
All right, so our story kicks off in Sydney, Australia. You've got two main players here. Codelfa Construction, they're the builders, and their client, the State Rail Authority of New South Wales. The job? A massive, super important new railway line for the city. I mean, this was a huge undertaking, and everybody involved was working off of a very, very specific and ambitious game plan. And here's the thing. The whole plan hinged on one critical assumption. The entire timeline, the budget, the whole shebang, was built on this one shared belief that Codelfa could just work around the clock. We're talking 3 shifts a day, 24/7, to get this massive tunnel dog. It was really the only way they could even dream of hitting their 130-week deadline. But yeah, there was a problem. A big one. And nobody saw it coming. The constant noise, the vibrations from digging a tunnel 24/7, it was just unbearable for the local residents living right above the construction site. So they got organized, they complained, and eventually they took them to court. They just wanted the noise to stop.
And this was the moment the project's entire foundation just crumbled. A court granted the residents an injunction. That's a legal order that forces something to stop. And just like that, Codelfa was legally barred from working at night and on Sundays. Their 24/7 plan completely shattered, and their budget along with it.
So, with the project now way over budget and falling seriously behind schedule, Codelfa had to do something. They decided to go to court themselves to try and claim all these extra costs from the State Rail Authority, and they showed up with 2 main legal arguments up their sleeve.
Okay, so their first and their biggest argument was based on this legal idea called frustration. What they claimed was that the court injunction was a totally unforeseen event that made the job so fundamentally different from what they'd signed up for that the original contract was, for all intents and purposes, dead. The deal, they argued, had been frustrated.
And for their backup plan, their plan B, they argued that there was an implied term in the contract. Codelfa said that, look, even though we didn't write it down, there was this shared, unspoken understanding between us, an understanding so obvious that it went without saying, that if something stopped the 24/7 work, the government would of course grant them an extension and cover the extra costs. So how in the world does a court decide if a contract is truly frustrated? It's not just about one side being unhappy or, losing some money. The bar is way higher than that. The High Court of Australia actually applied a very specific 3-step test to figure this whole thing out. The court looked at it piece by piece. First, was there a common assumption? Yep, that work would be continuous. Second, was the injunction some unforeseen event? Yes, again. Both parties genuinely thought they were immune from this kind of thing. But it's this third step that's the real kicker. Did this event make the job radically different? Not just harder, not just more expensive, but radically different. That's the key word. So, you've got the 2 arguments on the table. Either the contract was frustrated, or there was this obvious implied term that a court should enforce. After a whole lot of deliberation, the highest court in Australia came to its decision. And here it is, right from the judge's reasoning. The court actually agreed with Codelfa on their main point. Being forced to switch from 3 shifts to 2 didn't just make the job harder, it completely transformed it into something else. It was, in the eyes of the court, a radically different undertaking. Okay, so here's the bottom line. Codelfa won on frustration. The court said the original contract was officially terminated from the date of the injunction. But, and this is a huge but, they lost on the implied term. The court decided it wasn't nearly obvious enough. I mean, who's to say what the parties would have agreed to if they'd thought of an injunction? Maybe they would have agreed to share the costs, or maybe they would have just abandoned the project altogether. It simply didn't go without saying. All right, so a construction company won a case back in 1982. So what? Why are we still talking about it? Well, because the principles that came out of this case are absolutely fundamental for anyone who makes an agreement today. I don't care if you're a freelancer, a small business owner, or managing a multi-million-dollar project. This matters to you.
The takeaways here are crystal clear. If your entire plan hangs on one single thing, like working 24/7, you have to write it down in the contract. You've got to plan for the unexpected with what-if clauses. And most importantly, never, ever assume something is obvious to both sides. Because as Codelfa learned the hard way, proving something is so obvious it goes without saying is incredibly difficult. And relying on the doctrine of frustration, that's not a strategy. That's a desperate last-ditch effort.
And this whole case leaves us with a really fascinating question. We like to think of contracts as these ironclad promises, right? But what Codelfa proves is that when the world changes around you in a way that is truly radical and unforeseen, sometimes even the most solid agreements can be broken, not by a person, but by circumstance itself.